Please listen carefully.
Have you had a period recently? No?
And on that note, I'm going to start. What's up, sisters? Welcome back to another episode of Everyone and Their Sister. My name is Christina.
I'm Natasha.
And I'm Stephanie.
And today we are going to be talking all about the idea of everyday horror. So this episode was inspired by a couple of things. Right before we started recording, it was inspired by the everyday horror of just like being a woman alive in the world with hair and having to deal with that and ingrown hairs. And I'm like so disgusted and so creepy, and it actually works out really well for what we're talking about today. But really we're doing this episode because we wanted a little bit to talk about Lovecraft Country. I don't think we're not gonna talk about it in terms of like a review, because there are so many great Black critics out there that have already reviewed Lovecraft Country. And so if you haven't seen one of their amazing reviews about like how excellent it is, you can just look it up and you can watch it. But it has really like revived this conversation around really good like Black horror and horror that's not told from the perspective or the like viewpoint of like white men, and how it's really good. And just like all the insidious things about it. So we really wanted to talk about the idea of, you know, our favorite horror things, our favorite horror books, movies, and TV shows, where the horror is actually not about something mystical. It's not about, you know, a monster under the bed. It's not about, you know, great big eldritch monsters or, you know, witches on revenge hunts. It's about the little everyday horrors of being alive, most of which end up being stories that aren't about white dudes because they don't have a lot of everyday horrors about being alive. Oftentimes, way more often, the thing that is horrifying, more terrifying than anything else, is just like a cis straight white man. And so we really wanted to talk about that a little bit. And Lovecraft Country is a great gateway into that, because one thing in the very first episode, there is that mix of that horror of like actual eldritch monsters that are very like based in Lovecraftian horror, and the horror of like being in Jim Crow era. Not even the South, they're in the Northeast, I believe, right? Where some of the most terrifying scenes in that show are not when, you know, Jackie Robinson baseball bats down a like great big red monster, but rather like very slow, creepy cop car chases in a sundown state.
Sundown state. Oh, the worst.
And it's great. This whole episode is really about that theme of like, think about that moment in Get Out where that whole movie is so good and so horrifying, but is there anything more terrifying and more gasp worthy than when they are driving down the country road and they get pulled over?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is easily.
What you mean when he's leaving the house and a cop car pulls up?
Both, yeah.
Both scenes, yeah.
Both times, the beginning and the end, because that happens twice. So yeah.
Because I remember I was sitting in the audience, and it was a primarily Black audience, by the way. And we're all that end scene. Everybody gasped.
Same in my theater too.
And somebody said no.
That was me. Being like, oh my god, no.
But yeah, I totally.
That was the best audience experience, that movie.
It truly was.
It really was.
Like the clapping at the end, perfect. But yeah, like the everyday horror stuff, I absolutely love. And like, I think similarly, something like, I especially love when it's like showing two aspects of it, where it shows like actual monster horror and then like everyday like people horror. So like something similar would be like The Walking Dead, where like, sure, zombies are horrifying, but people are more horrifying.
Yeah. And that, I think, is very much the crux of what we're going for. And even just like on a personal level, I really enjoy horror. I've definitely grown to enjoy it more as an adult than I did as a kid. And one of the articles I read recently, which was talking about how Beloved is the best horror novel that will never be acknowledged as a horror novel, basically, by like the gatekeepers of the genre. we're talking quite a bit about, you know, when you say you don't like horror, what you really mean is that you just haven't read the right book. Like, you're not reading the right authors. You haven't seen the right movies. And I can definitely identify with that quite a bit. Because as a kid, I was like, oh, I'm not a huge fan of horror. But as I've gotten older, and horror has gotten better for sure, but also more stories about, more like horror stories from these other viewpoints have come out. I have like a much better appreciation for what horror is, and I love it now. But I also appreciate more the horror that is other people versus the horror that is very like mystical based.
There's just something about it, like, even though it's like in a lot of ways it could be depressing, the way it talks about it as if it's like a lesson to be learned, I think that there's something valuable in that type of horror.
And so on that note, Stephanie, what is your favorite everyday horror?
Well, we talked about this theme last night, and I was like, I truly have nothing, because this is not something I watch, read, ever. But then I realized that I was a fool, because I'll set the scene. It was 2018. It was October. I was in the mood for something cozy. And you know what I decided to watch? The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix. And you know what? That is not comforting. But if you don't know what it's about, it is based on the novel by Shirley Jackson. It's loosely based. It's not the same, but all the character names are used. And it's basically a family horror about how trauma affects your life in different ways. And I think this is such a well done show. Like, I was shocked about, I mean, I don't know, do you guys cry at horror movies? Anyone? Because I did.
I mean, like, this,
it was like very emotional.
Yeah, this one was emotional, so I can see why. Like, I definitely had tears.
I mean, you know me, the dead heart of the world was me, but I was crying my eyes out during this whole season.
I think because, like, also it's family dynamics and like emotional trauma. So
I mean, as we know from my other book that I picked, I enjoy big families, and this is a big family, but taken to the next level of trauma. And as Christina was mentioned, a cis white male. The premise of this book is the brother writes a novel about the trauma they experienced in this house, but every single person in the house has a different perspective of what was actually going on. And I think the women in the series are actually, like, the trauma that they experience is this has been a while since but the trauma they experience is so much more complicated than him, because he even they're like, the major crux of it is his dad's like, what you saw wasn't real, like that was a trauma itself, but you assumed it was real because that was your assumption. And it's just like different perspectives of the house. So basically it's two timelines about like when they were children living in this house, and then they come back together after a period of time apart because the younger sister commits suicide, whose name I can't remember. No. Like, this, it's so well done, and I'm so surprised. I loved it so much.
There's something also, I feel like, I mean, like, it's also been a while for me since I watched this. There's something in like some of the silences between them that I feel like I remember was eerie in itself. Like, just like the way that they interact. Like, I think it was a funeral parlor, right?
That's okay. So that was one episode when, it's like one shot. They didn't do many takes, and like incredible. But like the dynamics of both of them coming together, because like you want them all to be together in one spot because that's where the drama is. But like what they, like the fights that they go on, it's so good. I forgot. I'm gonna have to watch this over again.
Yeah,
I rewatched it
for this.
There's going to be, but it's going to be different characters, different house. They're going to anthologize it basically.
Oh, okay.
That makes sense.
I actually rewatched it this year because I also really enjoyed that show. I thought it was so well done. And like, to what we're speaking, I don't think it's one of the most well done scenes. I think this is a scene where you can tell that men are involved quite a bit. But one of the most heartbreaking scenes is when, and actually I'm annoyed now that I can't remember her name, but the sister, the lesbian who
Theodora?
Theodora, thank you,
Theo.
She is one of the siblings. It's suggested that the women have like a power to a certain extent. It's not like abject fantasy by any degree, but it is very much like a ghost story, and there's an element of like being connected to other planes, so to speak. So she's like, I guess an empath would be the closest thing you could call it. And there's a scene where she's a child psychologist, and she's in the house of one of her clients, I guess, or patients. Who's like an 11-year-old girl in the foster system being taken care of in this house. And you, again, like watching it as a woman, as she slowly makes her way through the basement, as she starts to like touch the things around her and like slowly starts to feel things, you kind of immediately know where it's going. But she has this scene where she sits down on a couch and her face changes. And I think every woman who was watching that immediately understood what was going on. Theo was seeing and feeling that her patient, this like 11-year-old child, had been molested on this couch. And like there was just something, again, I think there's problems with that scene, but there was something so universal in that moment of like, that is one of the most heartbreaking things that happens in that show, in a show filled with many heartbreaking moments.
I was gonna say, like, the show is really good at, like, with situations like that and, like, even, like, other people's situations, building the dread because you know it's coming. Yeah. Like, you know something is there the whole time, but it's, like, it's all about the dread you feel. It's never about, like, the jump horror or, like, the big dramatic, like, cry scene. It's more like, oh, I feel this, and it's, like, deeper seated.
Like, thinking back now, I don't remember any of the, like, jump out, there's a ghost in the bed, but I remember Theo scene. I remember them fighting in the funeral home. Like, those are the parts that I picked up. The brother that has an addiction. Oof.
Yeah.
The Nell ghost freaked me out the first time with her broken neck.
Oh, yeah.
Broken neck lady.
And, like, even watching that, like, I knew she was dead, but in my head, I'm like, maybe she's not dead. Maybe she'll come back as, like, the fool that I am because I don't watch horror, but I'm like, you know what? It could be okay.
Even one of my absolute favorite lines is when, you know, they're siblings and they're talking about Nell, and it's Theo and it's the other sister, the one who's like clearly the mom of the group, who sort of like replaces
Shirley.
The mom after she dies. Shirley, thank you. They're talking about Nell and they describe her, and it's that she has one foot in the grave and another on a banana peel. And it was just like such an insulting description, but also like it really showed how they view their sister, who goes through something really traumatic, but they're all trying to deal with their own trauma. Oh my God, it's like the Umbrella Academy.
Truly. If you think about like the family dynamics.
I just love sibling dynamics, y'all. That's what it is.
I do love sibling dynamics. And like, well, what's more harsh on you than your other sister? Like, there's no one as mean. There's no one who knows what you are like self-conscious about. It's your sister, and like they perfectly show that in this series. Oh, this is so good. I'm gonna have to immediately watch this again. But
there is something uniquely horrifying about not just family but siblings in general, of that feeling of like, you're the worst person I've ever met in my life, but also if anything happened to you, I would be absolutely devastated. Like, truly the embodiment of a horror story is just having a family.
Well, like the trauma of like, okay, you could hate your sibling, but you two share a shared experience. Even if you hate them, you both went through the same thing. So it's wild. Families are wild. Like, I could go on and on about this.
Families are just
they're traumatic in itself.
You get traumatized together, and then you traumatize each other. It's fine.
Yeah.
I also like to point out, you know how you said my Michael Huseman man? He's in this TV show, just FYI. The basic guy in the Potato Peel Society, he is in the show.
I was like, he's so basic, I can't remember who you mean.
Yeah.
The
brother that wrote the book.
Yeah, I believe that. He does feel very basic. I've forgotten what he looks like.
I just want to, can I go off topic for a second?
Yep.
I'll give myself 2 minutes.
A quick second. We're at 15.
What are the contracts that Netflix signs for these people? Because every single person in the starring list has been in something else on Netflix. Can you tell me what's their deals? Do they sign a Netflix contract and you're like, you're going to be in 3 of our shows? We don't know what they're going to be, but if they fit it, you're going to be selected? Or do they just use the same casting director?
I was making this joke with somebody because I think I saw something on Twitter, but in every single like Netflix comedy movie, have you noticed Michelle Buteau is in every single one?
I know exactly what meme you're talking about. She got that Netflix contract money, honey. Yeah.
And I'm like, there must be something, because she literally is. She'll make like cameos in different things. And she's not like, it's not like she's not famous enough for cameos, but they're just like those subtle cameos where like, oh, it's Michelle Buteau again.
See, how? I want the behind the scenes info. Someone tell me what you sign when you sign up with a Netflix project, because 3 people I already know have been in 3 other things.
It feels a lot like, you know, like American Horror Story or something, or like basically any, what's the director? Frick.
It's the Netflix cinematic universe.
Yeah, it is. Like the whole time you're like, oh, this person's in this season as this person now.
I mean, Nell was in You season 2, which was perfect.
Oh, she was good in that. And You was also something we could have picked for this.
That's so
didn't
true.
watch season 2 yet because I heard it wasn't that good.
I mean, it's not. I hate watch that whole thing.
Yeah, like I think You was one of those shows where like you can still just watch it. Like even if you didn't like it, you're gonna have like a decent enough time.
That's all I gotta say. Oh, this was shot beautifully also. Like,
Oh yeah,
I always bring that up for some reason, but like visually, excellent.
Because it had an atmosphere and it hit you. Like it really did feel like that everyday horror where like everything was just always a little bit dark and a little bit foggy, except for moments where the brightness was jarring on purpose. Like I think for this topic, this is an excellent pick. Like even with the little bit of like fantasy based stuff that was happening with the ghosts and everything, this was very much so. And it makes sense with the book that it's based off of, but like this was very much so a show about just trauma as horror.
I feel like when this came out, it was very popular, but over the years, it's kind of like dwindled and no one really talks about it anymore. So I'm hoping this fall season, people are going to rediscover this again, or they'll have season 2. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm excited for season 2.
Sign me up. I'm ready. I never watch horror stuff, but here we are.
All right. Nat?
My pick is actually a movie this time. Surprise. I did not choose a book. It's called I See You. I believe it came out in 2019. It's the same director who did I, Boy. I don't know if you guys watched that one. So I See You is about when a 12-year-old boy goes missing. The lead investigator, Greg Harper, struggles to balance the pressure of the investigation and troubles with his wife, Jackie, especially after they face a recent affair committed by Jackie. Great strain is put on the family, and it slowly gnaws away at Jackie's grip on reality. But after a malicious presence manifests itself in their home and puts their son Connor at risk, the cold, hard truth about evil in the Harper household is finally uncovered. What I like about this movie is kind of like Lovecraft Country. It poses this supernatural element, but the real horror is people for sure. And that's what we're talking about, everyday horror. But in this case, the supernatural element actually doesn't exist. This is like a huge spoiler, but it's fine. This movie's been out for a while. Like the thing that they pose as the entity in this movie, it's so creepy. So like the poster, you'll see it, it's like this mask of this like creepy metal looking mask, and I think it's like a toy that the kid owns in their family, and you keep thinking like the toy is alive. Like the whole, I would say for like a good 20 minutes of the movie, you think that's the entity that's like in this household, but they do this really great setup where like the entity moves around, or you're like, oh shit, this is the thing that's like doing shit to them. Like at some point, the father, who's the investigator investigating the missing boy, he finds that he's wet the bed, and he's like, what the fuck? But then you're like, oh, this has something to do with the entity or whatever. And like the way the film is done is so interesting, because like you first see it from Jackie's perspective, where she's just like, oh, there's some noises in the house, whatever. And then it's almost like there's 3 parts to this movie. You see it from Jackie's perspective. In the second part of the movie, you follow around this guy and this girl who are house squatters, but they do it for social media. And so you're kind of like, what the fuck is the point of this part of the movie, right? Like you're following them along on her little video camera that she's filming it for other people, and you find out she's homeless, and she meets this guy, and they house squat. And of course, they're house squatting in the Harper's home. So like you go from supernatural entity possibly in the beginning with the wife dealing with some shit and she believes shit's going on, to the second part where you're like, oh, they have squatters in their home living in their walls. And so like the whole time that things go missing or food moves around or whatever, you make that connection in the second part of the movie where it's actually the squatters. But then there's the third part where you're like, what about the missing boy, or what about the son, and all of that stuff. And it becomes this whole thing where you're building a story about who the actual monster or like the terrible person in this household is. And spoiler, it's the father.
When is it not?
When is it not the man?
Shocked.
Also, if you take out that whole last part about the missing kid, that's also an episode of Happy Endings.
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. The squatter in the ceiling. Yeah. So, like, okay. kind of like that. So when you're seeing it from the squatter's perspective, you start to build like a clearer story of both the husband and the wife's dynamic. The husband is this investigator that's investigating actually not just this one boy going missing, but several children going missing. And like it's been like this like serial thing, but he's like investigating, and his like partner is kind of like, no, I'm convinced this is person that went underground like years ago or whatever, and it's the same person, same MO. And this lead detective is like, nah, it's just like a total one-off thing.
It's him.
Yeah, immediately your suspicions are just like, okay, well. But the way it's done is so good because you're seeing it from the squatter's perspective. So you see the wife cheated on the husband. He's pissed at her. They're not talking, blah, 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 blah. She's freaking out because she thinks that there's a ghost in the house now. And like, she's like, my son's in danger. Oh, so the wife's like, the person that the wife is cheating on with comes to her and is like, no, leave your husband, blah, blah, blah. And you see the whole thing that happens with him, and the squatter actually witnesses the husband killing that man. And she's like, what the fuck? And so she like runs away, but the husband realizes something's going on, finds that squatter, takes her away, and like the whole time you think it's the squatters that are what's bad, because like the male squatter is just kind of like, he's crazy. So like the part where the husband wet the bed, the squatter peed on him. And I was just like, when that moment happened, I screamed. I was like, oh my god. And I was like, this guy is insane. This squatter is like absolutely nuts. And like the female squatter is like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And he keeps causing havoc, and you're like, oh my god, this is the guy. This is gonna be like a whole like situation where like he's gonna hold his family hostage, blah blah blah. Like you're building all these stories in your mind, when slowly they're like building like the incredible insidiousness of the husband instead. And when it builds on that, oh, it was really well done. I think like I read a review somewhere that said that the whole movie felt like an eerie suspense exercise that starts out looking like a supernatural tale, but then all your viewer assumptions or whatever about certain things and how it's engineered actually pulls the narrative in a totally different direction. And then it's a twist. And like I found that was the same kind of like with iBoy, which like probably not a lot of people have seen, but it's on Netflix. But it also like you assume that the movie is going to be one thing or the story is going to be one thing, when actually like the horrifying elements lie somewhere else, and you're like, holy shit. But it's really, really well done. Even though I've spoiled it, I still think that you can still watch it. It's really good.
It reminds me of the Agatha Christie story that Christina said in the last episode.
Yeah, it's like, it's surprising, but I think this one definitely focuses more on like how the people are fucked up. Because like literally the only person not fucked up in this story is the kid, like the son. You're just like, oh, he's the only normal one here, but he's definitely going to be traumatized by this when he's older.
So he'll not be normal for long.
No.
I guess a healthy dose of trauma at this point is normal.
Yeah, I think
we're all just walking around with it.
It's true. Yeah, like the story is so, and I definitely think the movie built a certain atmosphere. You're expecting it to be like a murder mystery at first, and then you're like, oh no, it's supernatural. And you're like, I don't know what's going on. At some point you're like, what the fuck? And I'm leaving out specific things on purpose because there's certain connections that I want other people to make.
There's definitely already a lot of that movie out there, and like I would like to watch it. It does sound good.
Yeah, like there's just like there's a lot of, I would say it's so well crafted when you find how everything connects, and like the way the story is told, it's totally worth watching. Like I actually probably would watch it again knowing what happens. Yeah, excellent movie. Definitely suggest it. Can't remember what the director's name is, but probably a white man, unfortunately.
Adam Randall. I see you. I have the Wikipedia up. Fact checking, you know?
Probably a white man, right? It is a white man.
I assume it's I mean, Adam Randall, yes.
Yeah.
I can hazard a guess and say so. Helen Hunt is in this. That's wild.
Oh, yeah. Helen Hunt is Jackie, the wife.
And Sam Trammell, who I believe is from True Blood.
Oh, he's the guy she cheats with.
Yeah.
Well, should have mentioned that.
You should have mentioned that.
If you know these actors, and you'll probably also recognize the husband. I forget what he was in, but they're all excellent actors. Even like the what is it called? The Squatters. They're also very, very well done. I was impressed. But yeah, horrifying. I would never want to find a squatter in my wall.
Can't imagine anyone that would.
I mean, in Happy, what is it called?
In Happy Endings, it's a ceiling. But actually, you do have squatters because you have squirrels in your house, don't you?
I mean, they're not inside right now.
They were trying to get in there. I wouldn't be surprised if there were a couple living in those walls. As I mentioned, I think they're coming for you. So
They're slowly breaking their way in to take over our home.
that's my belief.
They can't afford this rent.
I let the landlord try to collect from the murderous squirrel posse.
They're just gonna like fit nuts in through their mailbox. All right, Christina, what's your pick?
All right, so this one actually ends up being difficult because one of the reasons I suggested this topic is because I really wanted to talk about Final Girls because I have been in this like very horror mood, like I said, because I was reading all these things that were like inspired because Lovecraft Country has come out and now Antebellum is coming out. So like all this stuff has been happening. And I had this thing where realistically, I actually just want to talk about Final Girls and go on this whole tirade. But as I was looking at stuff, realistically, I think I have a better pick for this, for the idea of everyday horror, because I think for me what this theme is really about is when it doesn't matter what the theme of the movie you're watching is. It doesn't matter what the genre is. If a woman is out alone at night, you are immediately freaked out if you are a woman watching. If a Black person is in a car and gets pulled over by the police, it doesn't matter what you're watching, you are immediately freaked out. Like the tone of the movie could be literally anything, and that moment will terrify you to the point that like going back and watching older TV shows and movies where it happens, I am still terrified even knowing that they really weren't putting a ton of that in most movies for the most part. So I really wanted to pick something that highlighted those moments as a horror movie. And so I ended up picking Assassination Nation. And if you haven't seen it, I really, really recommend it. I'm pretty sure it's on Prime, I believe. So I think you can be anywhere and watch it. It is so good. And like, yes, it's directed by a white man. And I really didn't want to pick this, but I found out while I was reading it. So Assassination Nation is about young girls. And it was made in 2018. So it's very much like Gen Z. So the director, after he wrote the script, when he hired the main actors that played the main four characters, he gave them the script and was like, what is wrong with this? Like, what is not realistic to you and your experience and like how you would talk? And then like intook their direction about what didn't fit right and what didn't make sense and put it back in the script. And that way I was like, okay, I can live with this. Because that is why one thing that is very shocking about Assassination Nation is that it really captures that everyday terror of like being a young woman in a, not just in anywhere, but in a small town, in a world with social media in particular. So the plot point of Assassination Nation is that there's these four friends who are part of this main friend group. They live in a town called Salem, and yes, that's intentional. The main character is Lily, who is this like very basic sort of white girl epicenter of the group. A lot of the drama sort of starts with her storyline. Bex, who is a trans girl that is played by Harry Neff, and Em and Sarah, who are two sisters. And I always think this is really interesting. Em and their mother are both Black women. Sarah is white, and I don't think they explain this at all at any point through the movie. Like, I don't think they address it. I don't think I realized at first either that they were sisters until I watched it the second time. And I was like, wait, you both live here? What is happening? But that's the sort of main friend group. And the beginning of the movie has a very Euphoria vibe. It's very much about the kind of like 17-year-old that is going to parties and getting absolutely hammered and doing drugs, and like makeup is on point. Everything everything has a very, just like a very party girl lifestyle. They like wearing very short, revealing clothing, which like makes sense for who they are. And they've got this very like misunderstood mean girl / not that popular vibe. Like they all have their own distinct personalities, but definitely there's a specific vibe about who they're trying to portray these characters as. And it's just pretty standard teen rep, I think, in 2020. But the main plot comes when there's an anonymous hacker starts breaking into people's search histories and their computers and dumping all their private information online for everyone to look through. And it starts with just single people. Like first it's the mayor of the town, then it's the principal of the school, and then they dump literally half of the population of the entire town's information online. and it's super brutal. There's all this stuff where like the principal is blamed for like people are calling him a pedophile because he just has pictures of his like daughter in the bath when she's 6 years old, just like standard family pictures anyone would have. But also it's got his porn search history where like there's stuff that says teen girl in it, and like it turns it. Yeah, but it's that kind of thing where it's like all porn, like the way it's portraying it is this is very much like a solid dude that is the thing of a witch hunt because this whole town is terrified of what's going on, and it's easier to vilify him. And the show is really good about, or the movie is really good about highlighting like every person that is angry at him for this has a version of this. You know, there's a scene where the main character, her parents are vilifying this man, and I think it's important that he's a black man. I actually do think that that is very relevant. They're vilifying him for it, and she's like, you literally have a framed picture of me naked in the bath at 3-year-old on the mantle. How is that different? And then the dad has to like awkwardly explain away and try to explain like it's sexual with him, but it's not with me. And like it's very well done in terms of the like awkward leaps and bounds that people have to take. But as all the leaking happens and all more people get access to it, everyone starts getting in everyone's business. And the main girl in particular has a lot of shit going on where she is sleeping with a married guy who is significantly older than her. So it's very predatory behavior on the guy's part. Like she calls him daddy, and you're like, you're 17, he's 30 something, he has a kid. Like everything about it is very creepy. And while her information doesn't get leaked, his does. And her boyfriend sees the picture online from this guy's phone and realizes that it's probably her, and a million other things happen. Like it starts off very, to a certain point, almost realistic. Like this all feels like things that could happen, and then it hits a turning point where it visually goes very hard into the like witch trial vilification of teen girls area, where it becomes incredibly violent. There's a lot of, honestly, it's horrifying but beautiful imagery, like visually as well. This movie is really well done. And
when that transition happened, I was just like, oh, we're going there.
Yeah, you literally go from something, again, that all seems very plausible to this local group of men basically SEAL Team Sixing their way into one of the girls' houses to capture and kill these girls because they want to be like, they're looking for an outlet to blame for all their anger and their rage and their embarrassment on and their hypocrisy on, and they pick these 14 girls, which is very intentional and very much based on like real life and how people just hate teen girls for no reason often, or like for doing things that is placed upon them in society. The character that the main girl is sleeping with, it like, to put it kindly, I guess, the way they portray him ends up being very good, because at certain points you think it's going to be too kind to the fact that ultimately he's sleeping with like a 17-year-old, but no, they don't. They really show that like, no, he's fucking crazy and like this is a predator, and it's just so well done in that sense. But the thing that really got me about this movie, and the thing that I thought made it really good for this, was it has more instances, I think, of that immediate gripping terror than any other movie I probably could have picked. A couple of key moments are, so Bex, who is trans, in very, very early on in the movie, there's a jock named Diamond, who as the movie goes on, I really love him. He was very sweet. He is into Bex, and they end up, they have sex at a party very early on. At this point, you're aware that the character is trans, and the whole time I was concerned because I was like, but does Diamond know? Like, what's going to happen to Bex? Like, is this going to end horribly, or is this going to end well? And it was actively a surprise that when the characters first have sex, he is not violent or doesn't do anything negative against her because she's trans. Like, that actually was surprising. That is the state of what we are talking about. But it gives you that like intense moment of terror. And then that terror is then replicated later on when Bex has one of the most terrifying and visual almost death scenes with Diamond, where this group of like, again, young jocks, after finding out that Bex and Diamond have sex, are trying to goad Diamond into killing her for, again, like they use all this very like transphobic language, the idea of like she tricked him or something like that, even though obviously she didn't. Like, he was very into her. And that scene is so well done. But the whole time, because of the characters you're talking about, they just don't feel safe. Everyone outside of the main character, Lily, does not feel safe in this movie. So you're genuinely terrified that Bex is 100% going to die. And even Diamond, to a certain extent, might end up dying as well.
I was gonna say, I remember it going from like, obviously it was like you said, it was like more like Euphoria in the beginning, where it's like party all the time, teens at school.
Can I just
blah,
break
blah.
in? This movie was created by the person Sam Levinson, who created Euphoria. So everything you're saying is
Okay.
blueprint for Euphoria.
I didn't even realize that. I was just like, oh, these have similar vibes.
Yeah, like that, it had that similar vibe, but like the whole time, even when the main character is talking to her like older pedophile dude, her affair dude, he like, there's like a horrifying element to it. Like the whole time there's like this, again, there's dread building, but then it suddenly turns into this thing where you're like, oh no, like I'm horrified, like shit is gonna go down, I'm so scared for them.
And it happens so many times. Another great scene is, again, the principal. So this Black principal at this press conference. So you've already seen one press conference where the mayor of this town, it came out that he liked wearing women's lingerie. And so all of these pictures of him in lingerie are like shown online, and he ends up killing himself in the middle of a press conference because, again, it's very much like a witch hunt. People have issues with him because of what they see as like this very deviant behavior. And then now you have the principal, who is this Black man, and they portray the audience at this press conference as a mob. And the principal actively is like, you think he's going to resign, basically, but he says he's not. Like, he hasn't done anything wrong. He knows that he can make up any perceived slights against his students. He is a good principal. This is shit that it's happening. It's not his fault. There's nothing he's doing wrong. Because, again, this character is not actually creepy in any way. It is people's perception and what they are putting onto him as it. But he is still a Black man at a conference with very much like an angry mob mentality. So the entire time you are worried for him. There are moments where the mob is screaming where I'm like, but are they going to kill him? So that gripping terror. At one point, I think a scene that really puts everything together, Lily, the main character, who for the most part you think is safe, is walking home in like a pair of those like jean booty shorts that are essentially underwear and like a crop top. And at this point, the whole town is kind of aware of her and like as very slutty and trampy, like the language they use. So these two dudes in a car start following her home and filming her and like live streaming it on Instagram, and then eventually end up chasing her through woods with like a knife. And even if you think she's not going to die, the whole time you're like, she's going to get raped. Like, there's just, you just know what the terror of that moment is with two men following Lily around. She has another one of those moments, one of the most terrifying scenes as well in this movie. Her boyfriend thinks that she's the person in a picture that was shared online. And to prove it, they're alone with each other in a gym. And you know it's creepy. Again, you just can't trust a woman alone with a white man. Like, the whole time you're like, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. But he's so creepy about it. And he's like, do you have this mole on your back? I think I've seen it, but I'm not sure. I don't know. And so what ends up happening is two of his like football dudes or whatever also come into the gym. They hold her down, and to find it, they have to like hold her on her front, pull her shirt up, and I think they even end up pulling her pants down a little bit. And the whole time you're like, nope, 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 nope. And you're almost relieved that he stops when he sees the birthmark and just leaves her there after saying these absolutely hateful, hurtful, traumatic things. You're almost relieved that it didn't get more physical than that because you were dead convinced it was. Like, this...
Right off to all of that. Ugh.
Oh yeah, this movie did those moments so well. I don't think I unclenched the whole time I was watching this movie. And in terms of like a good movie to watch with an audience, we watched this at TIFF Midnight Madness, and that was a really great audience to watch this movie with because everybody, I think, had that same level of terror, but there is an element of not camp, but visual enjoyment of the gore of everything. When the movie does end and the four main characters are very much so the four final girls, but they sort of band together this idea of like feminism and like fighting against their own vilification. It's a very great moment. The aesthetic of this movie is like 4 vinyl red leather coats, and I think that works out really well. Yeah, and
it's very like purge meets like feminist discourse, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. It's got that vibe as well. But it just did that everyday horror thing for me so well. Like, those are just a couple of examples. I could actively list more.
Yeah, there's so many like little subtle things I feel like I'm forgetting too from this movie. Yeah. It's been a while since we watched it.
There are a couple of moments with Em and her mother as well, where you're very concerned for their safety as Black women in this very, very white town specifically. It's noted, like, I think it's worth mentioning, even just like as a spoiler, one of the only good characters that dies is Em and Sarah's mother, which is this Black woman. And it's that thing where it's like, okay, you still killed off this like Black character, but the way she goes down of like protecting her daughter, like, she is very badass. She is clearly, I think she's the only good parent in the whole show as well, outside of the principal. Every other parent, every other person that's like very engrossed in this idea of this like white suburban lifestyle is horrible. They're horrible parents. Like, Lily is kicked out of her house. Meanwhile, when you find out at the end who the actual perpetrator of all these hacks are, it's very telling the way that they treat that perpetrator versus the way Lily was treated when they thought it was her. It's so well done. But God, the parents are fucking disgusting. And that's another horror. Just like the horror of having shitty parents who hate her 100%.
Mm-hmm. And they're more about like protecting their own interests, and I think that definitely speaks to like, again, the same discourse that they're having in this movie, where like this Black mother would die protecting her children versus like these white families, like they're like, oh no, it's an inconvenience to me, no thank you.
They would literally rather kick their child out on the street while people are trying to kill her than take care of her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's just such a good movie. I really recommend everyone watch it. Even just like visually, it's good, but it was heavy. I think watching it with an audience was helpful because it made the lighthearted, badass moments so much more enjoyable in a room full of people. Watching it alone, you definitely sit with the trauma of it a little bit more. But it's one of those things that really makes me reconsider that Teenage Girl Defense Squad tattoo, because like, teen girls deserve better than this. Okay, I think there's a lot of things you could talk about with the way the girls are treated in this, to even talking about more recent drama. Like, if you talk about the way people are talking about cuties, like, I think there's a very clear connection where like everybody became that angry mob at that principal in reaction to the Netflix marketing of cuties. And it's like, but you didn't, like, there are moments where your reaction and your ignorance say so much more about you than they do about the thing that you're complaining about. And that's very much the point of the horror of Assassination Nation, for sure.
It's interesting because the same people, speaking of cuties, the same people that are like arguing against it being there are the same people that, like, I don't know, like 3 weeks ago were like all pro any social movement right now. So it's just like, what is wrong with you? Like, you're willing to like believe just like some shitty marketing copy rather than reading into it and looking at like why this movie was created, or like the creator of this movie and what interviews that are out there readily.
Yeah.
So it's just like, I don't know, people.
Yeah, it really, and Assassination Nation really takes that ignorance, that hypocrisy, and shows it manifested as violence. But even when it's not, literally, again, SEAL Team Sixing your way into a house and actively trying to like chop up a young girl with an axe. It's just taking this kind of silent violence, or this kind of like petition-based violence, to its more aggressive conclusion. And I didn't know how relevant this would be until I was talking and got to that cuties reference on my own.
Yeah, no.
So who knew how timely that would be?
It's interesting that everything you said is like the blueprint for Euphoria. Like, if you don't like horror, you should, but this is interesting to you, you should watch Euphoria.
I still need to watch Euphoria. I have not.
Have you guys?
I have seen the first season. I'm not all caught up on Euphoria, but God, Zendaya is so good in that. Like, it's hard not to love it.
I'm just saying drug use is more of a play in euphoria and addiction, but everything you said, oof.
I appreciate any kind of media that really takes a hard look, or attempts to at least take a hard look at the like interesting and varied and complex lives of one trying to be a teenager at all right now, but especially trying to be a teenage girl, or especially trying to be a teenage girl who is Black or Indigenous of a color. Like the intersectionality of your life and the number of reasons that people hate you for no reason are so incredibly, like, there's like, imagine being 17 again and realizing there's literally nothing you can do to be good enough for anyone, because they will hate you for something. They'll hate you because you're 15. They'll hate you because you're a girl. They'll hate you because you're Black. They'll hate you for any reason they can find. And so because of that, your existence is just an invitation for violence.
I feel like high school is so traumatic that I blocked everything out. To be honest.
It truly was. I forget much about high school.
Like, just like people shitting on what teen girls like. Twilight was huge when I was in high school. It's getting sent home because my shorts were too short, when in fact it's not my fault that someone else is looking at my ass. Like, you know what I mean? Ugh, this is traumatic.
It's never it's like never the fault of the person looking at you and sexualizing you, despite the fact that you're clearly a young girl. It's somehow your fault for being a young girl and wearing just whatever you want to wear. You're inviting that violence into your life, where it's like, no. And again, you could have literally been wearing anything and someone still would have found a way to blame you.
Like, is my shoulder so appealing that it has to be 3? And like, what kills me the most is that a woman teacher was the one that had to be like, you can't wear that at school. You need to go home. It's like, go fuck off.
Yeah. And it's crazy to think like I'm sure there's people our age that are in the same situation now, where like they have students that are younger and they're doing the same thing. And like, it's nonsense. Like I'm sure I've talked about it, but like I've been talking to a lot of teachers recently, and like the types of rules that they have to uphold in the school are meant to make students fail. Like, it's meant to make kids suffer. Like, it's not, they're put in these authority positions for no fucking reason. Do they know better? No. Like, absolutely not. I think somebody was telling me there was a rule where, like, it's obviously, like, this is important context, but, like, there's a rule in this high school where the area is primarily Black. They have a rule where, like, you can only walk along the specific, like, 3/4 line when you're in the halls. And it's impossible to do, and you're penalized if you can't keep within this like weird line.
What the fuck is
It's like a fucking prison. It's fucking wild. But like, they have these stupid rules, like no hats, or like, what is a hat gonna do in an educational space? Like, nobody's sitting there with a hat being like, I can't think because I have a hat on. No, like, what is a tank top? Who is looking? You're the one that's sexualizing the child by being like, oh, you're wearing a tank top.
I don't think anyone was ever like to me, oh my God, you're wearing a tank top? I can't focus for the day. Like, no.
Literally no kids notice that. They're not like sitting there like, oh, I can see her arms.
And the fact like you can go on Instagram and see that anyway. So it's like, there's no different. Ugh, whatever.
I think that not just this movie, but like life in general is really good at highlighting that like all of those rules, all those things in place are not about the children whatsoever. It's about the projections of the things you as an adult feel like you are ashamed of or should be ashamed of, or all of the issues you have that you're projecting onto children. Again, it's your fault if you see a child and you have sexual thoughts. You need to connect with your own shit and the way that society addresses the sexualization of children. That's not their fault. A kid can't do anything about the way that you're thinking. It's not about protecting young boys from thinking sexual thoughts. It's about fucking protecting adult male teachers from doing predatory behavior, because you think more male teachers will be less predatory if girls are covered up, when you know that's not true. It's just easier to believe that and blame a girl. Like, everything is about hating children. And I think our generation is possibly at risk for being just as bad, like millennials about Gen Z. Like, you're already seeing where it's coming through, where some millennials are very like, the moment those I really appreciate those like Gen Z TikTok millennial burns and shit like that. And the way some people responded, it's like, just fucking let kids be. Like, be an adult, be better, fix the world we live in for them. Like, stop being a fucking dick. And I think, again, coming back to the like everyday horror, just the terror of being a child and having no control, and everyone around you makes decisions about your life for you. And it's almost never about what is best for you. It's about what's easier for them.
Yeah.
Kids to internalize this shit, because then you'll get to me and I clearly can't remember my teen life because of this. And like those people who grow up with trauma are gonna make the rules for the future kids. So it's just a vicious cycle.
I feel like there is one thing I'll say. I feel like with Gen Z, it's a little bit different because there's this realization that nobody else is going to do anything for them. And for a lot of them, there is no choice now. They do have to take the reins and do things. So all these like social movements that are started by young teens right now and all of Gen Z, it's because of what our world has created. There is no space for them, therefore they have to create their own space for everyone. And they're not just doing it for themselves, they're doing it for everyone collectively. And it's, I don't know, it's like, it's inspiring, but at the same time sad that it's like it has to come to them to do it.
The kids are all right.
Also think one thing that I will give is that because millennials have access to the internet, and because for so long we've been blogging everything about our lives and sharing it everywhere, I think that where we had no idea as children, that our parents and people who are older than us had no idea what was going on, and we had to become adults to realize that our parents had like still don't know what's going on, even when they're like 50 and 70, and you're like, holy shit, you raised me? I think the difference for being Gen Z is that you have access to all the same social media that millennials are on. You see firsthand that we have no idea what the fuck is going on. And I think that that is very helpful. Like, who the fuck are we to make rules for you when we don't know? Like, I think it's more obvious than ever that, like, the teachers enforcing these rules are 3 to 4 years older than the kids who somehow have to abide by them. And yet they all have the same lifestyle. They're all on the same social media apps. Mm-hmm. They're all living the exact same life. And I think that becomes more obvious with everything that's going on. So I like the idea of like a teen uprising. Like, go for it. You know what? You deserve every piece of retribution you want to put on this world that has done these things to you. And you, coming back again to our theme, I think this encompasses that really well.
I mean, as Harry Styles says, the teen girl is the most powerful person in the universe, and I agree.
It's true.
Thanks, Harry Styles.
Nobody would still be talking about the Beatles if their main fan base was adult males.
No one loves something more and will tell everyone that they love it than a teen girl. Like, you know how powerful that is, girls? Great.
You powerful.
We powerful. They powerful. Okay, that's it. Bye-bye.
And on that note, our picks again. So mine was Assassination Nation. It's on Prime to stream.
Mine was I See You. It is, I believe, on Crave.
Mine is The Haunting of Hill House, season 1 on Netflix.
Thank you guys so much for listening. If you want to talk to us about your favorite everyday horror, if you have any thoughts about the things that we talked about, obviously they were very big. There's a lot of stuff. You can find us on Pinterest, Twitter, and Instagram at EatsCast on Twitter and Instagram, at Everyone and Their Sister Podcast on Pinterest.
Correct. Yes.
Please let us know your thoughts. Share with us if you have any ideas for any future episodes. We always give a shout out to our regular listeners like Shanice and Wendy and Marina. Thank you guys so much for keeping our podcast download stats consistent.
Love ya.
But yeah, thank you so much. That was our everyday horror episode. Bye.
Bye.
Music credit goes to Jazahar, but please listen carefully and learn about the wallpaper.
People be selfish.
Like, I want to